right, everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started. If you weren't on just a couple of minutes ago, this is Sydney Holland with FBN. Today we're going to be talking about fungicides. But before we get started, we're just going to go through a couple of introductory items, and then Doyle is going to take us through the webinar, and then at the end we're going to talk a little bit about FBN direct offerings, as well as go through some of the questions that were asked throughout the webinar. If at all you do have any questions during the webinar, please feel free to fill out or to enter your questions in the question box on your screen, and we will do our best to answer as many as we can at the end of the webinar. Would like to introduce FBN Agronomy and our FBN Agronomy team. You can find some of their work and some of their research and any content that we're pushing out that have to do with agronomic related topics on fbn.com, on our webinars or emergence blog, or through our direct protect emails that distribute on Tuesdays, or through our new FBN podcast. I'd like to introduce Doyle Oerter, our senior staff agronomist here at FBN. He's going to be taking us through the webinar today. So Doyle, if you will, go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself, and then feel free to take it away.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm Doyle Oerter, senior staff agronomist with Farmers Business Network here in South Central Nebraska. I've been a consulting agronomist in this area of Nebraska and part of Kansas for the past 41 years. So anyway, I have had some experience. So hopefully I can give you some valuable information today. And like they said, don't be afraid to ask questions anytime. Next slide, there we go. So what's important about a fungicide application? Everybody wants to know what their return on investment is going to be. Today's prices, $350 corn plus the fungicide plus application, if done aerially by a plane or a helicopter, is probably going to be between 8 and 10 bushels just to break even. So you got to keep that in mind as far as what you're really after with your fungicide application. One thing about fungicides that we do need to keep in mind is that they don't add yield, but they protect the yield. By protection, I mean they make the crop more tolerable to drought, more tolerable to temperature variation and things like that, but it does not add to the yield. Your yield is what it is, but this keeps you from losing any of that yield. And so that, to put that in perspective, it'd be like the muscle man on the left versus me on the right, completely worn out versus strong. As long as the plant is healthy, it makes more carbohydrates, adds to the ear, and makes more test weight in the grain. And that's how you protect the yield. You get the full potential of what your yield was. Okay, and then, you know, with corn, it's similar to wheat in a lot of aspects. Like wheat, you have to just protect with the fungicide. You need to protect that flag leaf. That's where about 80% of your yield comes from, is that flag leaf in wheat. So you can give up all the other leaves, you'll still have 75% in wheat. In corn, the upper 8 to 10 leaves of a corn plant, they're critical for the photosynthesis and yield and making the carbohydrates and sugars that get transferred to that ear and making the grain. So that's why the tassel time treatment has been popular, which we'll get into in a little bit. So here's a good picture example of what benefit you would get when you put on a fungicide. The one on the left is a healthy plant. The leaves are not have any infection of any disease. If they do, it's negligible in this picture. The one on the left, that's gray leaf spot, and you can see how much leaf tissue has been destroyed. And when you destroy that much leaf tissue, that means photosynthesis isn't occurring on those areas. Less carbohydrate, less able to translocate the sugars and carbos that have been produced by that plant to get it to the ear to make grain. You can almost consider it like a hailstorm. A hailstorm would be a similar scenario. You've lost leaf area. and that destroys some of your yield potential. So now the big question is, when should I apply, or how should I apply a fungicide if I really need a fungicide? Because it's a lot of money, and I understand that. And it is a bit of a crapshoot every time if there's no disease present. So yeah, there's many factors that go into making that decision. One of the first ones you should consider is the variety that you have planted. They should give you a rating on how it handles certain diseases. Like this one here, if you go down towards the bottom, or right in the middle with the gray leaf spot, let's go with that one, because that's one of the most common diseases we fight. It gives it a good rating. It's not very good, but it's good. But ear rots, you can see, is just average. The southern leaf blight is very good, and Goss's wilt very good. That Goss's wilt isn't really a disease that we can control because that's a bacteria, so no fungicide is going to control that. But it also says drought tolerance is good, stalk rots are good. So in this scenario, I would say if southern rust was headed for your area or had been located within miles of you, say 50 miles of you, I would consider treating this hybrid for southern rust for sure. Gray leaf, if you find it and it looks like it's advancing up the plant, then I think I would treat it also. But they're just a decision, and you have to just kind of consider everything. And this is the hybrid disease. Okay, here's a picture of small plants. Now, a lot of guys like to treat with a fungicide at this stage of growth. I really don't. But crop rotation does come into this. If you are a minimum tiller, you have a lot of corn residue on the surface. That has a lot of inoculum, especially for gray leaf spot and a few other diseases. That when it rains or irrigation system goes over the top of it, it splashes those spores onto the lower leaves. And if it's humid enough and warm enough, those spores grow and make lesions on the leaves. So crop rotation and how much stubble or anything like that you have still comes into consideration. So tillage practices are really something you have to consider as well. Okay, there's more considerations for making these decisions. Like I said, early disease activity. Are you going to find a lot of early disease activity? Well, depends on the weather, things like that. So if you see it early, you might want to treat. If you think that the weather is fit and the environmental conditions are such that warm and humid make diseases grow fast. So we need to know that type of early disease activity. And that'll be just by scouting those fields. Late planting. Had one guy consider that this year. So I planted so late, I'm not going to have any disease. It won't even be tasseled, and that's when I treat. Well, gray leaf spot doesn't care how old that plant is. It's just looking for a source of food. So late planting doesn't mean that you won't have gray leaf spot. You may have it early on that plant and cause more damage than you've ever seen before if it's not handled. So consider the weather forecast. Like I said, if everything is suited for good fungal growth, that means warm and humid conditions, sunshine, that's heavy dew. That is exactly what is the best thing that can help the fungus grow. So forecast also comes into the consideration of whether you're going to spray or not. And then, of course, the other thing is standability at harvest, and that's what this is all about. A lot of stock rots come in and that sort of thing, and I know a lot of people treat only because they do not want the weakened stock and lodge stocks at planting, and that can happen. So a fungicide can protect against anthracnose and charcoal stock rot and things like that. So that leaves your yield potential at the top. So you want to protect that yield again. It's not making yield. The other factor, of course, like we just said, is grain prices. If it was $7 corn like we've had in the past, it'd only take 3 or 4 bushels to make that fungicide have a good ROI. But in our cases today at $3.50 or somewhere in that area, it's going to take twice that many bushels. So it's much simpler to protect against lesser bushels and have a better return if the prices were high. Now we're going to go through a little bit of how the fungicides actually work in the corn itself. Fungicides, they destroy the cell walls of the fungi itself, so the fungi continues or does not continue to grow. It makes it respiration and just breaks up the respiration of the fungus. So that's what fungicides, that's how they work. There's two types of fungicides. There's a curative, which it's kind of a, I don't know, it's not curative. It doesn't cure the plant from the disease that it has, but it stops the growth to go any further. So it's kind of a, I don't know, misinforming word, curative. All it does is stop the pathogen from occurring anymore. It stops it at that point. And so there's a couple examples of those there. Pizarro and Tilt are examples of the triazole group of fungicides that are considered curative. And the other one is strobilurins, and they are known as the preventive. They're group 11s. Examples of those are Headline and Quatris. Those have to be put on before infection exists. So you have to put it on there before anything happens. Once it has occurred, it does not prevent it, because once it takes hold, you've already got it. So it's a contact and systemic. So, but that's what the two are, is preventive and curative. And of course, in the perfect world, you would apply both, but that will increase your cost. Most fungicides last, like it said here, 14 to 21 days. Sometimes if it doesn't have a rain fast, or you haven't applied it with an oil of some sort or a surfactant, it may last less than that under certain conditions or heavy rainfall. But 14 to 21 days is a pretty good distance. If you treated, most of the time, you treat around when tassels are emerging, and you go 21 days, that should carry you to dough, maybe even heavy dough if the weather is right. Early season fungicide, we had talked about that before. The leaves of early season corn, if you see lesions on there, and say it was gray leaf spot and you're at 9-leaf corn, yes, it would probably definitely pay to treat to keep that from going any further. But the problem is the top 8 to 10 leaves that we were talking about earlier that provide 75% of your yield have not even emerged yet. So you're going to have to protect those leaves in addition. So if you treat early, you probably will treat late as well. There's a lot of leaf diseases that cannot be taken care of by fungicide, and there is a list on the right-hand side here. You have Goss's, wilt, hocus, maize dwarf mosaic, bacterial leaf streak, which is relatively new in Nebraska anyway. Those are all bacterial diseases. They're not fungal diseases. So no matter what you put out there, you're not going to treat them with a fungicide and do any good. But you can control common rust in both soybeans and corn. You can control eye spot in beans, gray leaf spot, northern leaf spot and blight, and southern rust. So there's several here that you can control. But this is just a list of do's or yeses and no's that we had put together. And there's a couple more. Head smut as something, fungicide it'll treat it and it can help you. Brown spot in beans you can do, but no fungal will really treat anthracnose or Pythium, Fusarium, common smut, charcoal rot, and Diplodia in beans and corn. So those types you're not going to be able to treat, but yeah, the other ones you can. And then when you're mixing up your fungicide with your tank mix, a lot of people like to throw in a little bit of insecticide to take care of what insects may be out there, whether it's beans or corn. You can throw in a $2 or $3 treatment. Sometimes you have trouble with that tank mix, but regardless, you have to add either some non-lonic surfactant known as NIS or some COC known as crop oil. Those two, you just need that to get the fungicide on the surface of those leaves where you want it to do its work and make it stay there. You don't want it to run off. And both of these are to make certain that fungicide and insecticide stays on the leaf surface rather than roll off the cuticle, which sometimes gets quite waxy, especially on full grown corn. So I guess that's really how it kind of wraps up right now. I think that's my last slide. And the other thing is, I always end everything with this, but always read and follow the fungicide label or any other pesticide label that you're using. It is the law, and it's there to make your fungicide or what pesticide you're using the most efficient. It's not just trying to be a pain. It is actually helping you in a lot of ways. So with that, I guess I'll turn it back to you, Sydney.
Thank you, Doyle. If you do have any questions about the webinar, again, please feel free to enter them in the question box and we will address them at the end of the webinar. However, before we get to those questions, we're going to take you through some of our FBN Direct offerings. Our FBN Direct model is built on providing farmers with savings. The way that we're able to do this is cutting out the middleman, and so that we work directly with manufacturers to provide you with high quality products at a fair price through our Farmer Direct model. We also are able to provide you with convenience through ordering online or through our mobile app. You can also have your products delivered to your farm or pick it up at one of our local warehouses. We are expanding our distribution centers across the country in order to better meet farmers' in-season needs. So for any products that you're needing to purchase, say yesterday, we want to make it more convenient for you to pick those up so that you can have them right when you need them. We also have in-season financing at a 4.5% annual rate with no payment due until December 1st of 2019. You can look out for alerts on deals of the month through price alert text messages, as well as our monthly pest polls. You can always order online through our online store, or you can call us at 1-844-200-FARM. And if you ever have any questions about agronomic related topics, please feel free to reach out to our agronomist by texting agronomy to 313131, and we'll be happy to answer any questions that you have. But right now, I think that we are ready to start answering a few of the questions that did come in during the webinar. So Doyle, we have one here. The first question is, how effective is running fungicides through a center pivot irrigation system with a low rate of water? In this case, 1/4 of an inch or less.
Yes, that's a good question, and I really want to stress this. It's a great way to put it on. I've walked behind many pivots that have put it on, and 1/4 of an inch or less of water is what's adequate. 1/4 of an inch of water is a lot of water. That's still like 6,000 gallons an acre. So yeah, you've got a lot of carrier out there and you're covering the entire plant really well. So yes, that is a very effective way to do it. And I would really say that is a smart way of doing it, because you're going to be running the pivot anyway. And you're applying some water that may be needed, and you're putting on the fungicide at the same time. Just make sure you've got all your valves in place to stop the backflow and things like that, and be certified and all that sort of thing. But yes, that's a great way to do it.
Great, thanks Doyle. We have one more question here. My corn was planted quite a bit later than normal. Does that mean diseases may not bother my crop this year? No,
it doesn't. It depends on a lot of other things. One thing is your tillage practice. If you've got a lot of stalks and old material on the top of the ground that would would hold your inoculant for, say, gray leaf spot or another disease. That increases your odds. And if you've planted late, that also means that everything may be already started and they may get splashed up there quicker. I think it almost increases your odds for disease if you're in a no-till situation. So it does not. You may have to treat twice if it comes out early on early corn.
Great. We have another question here. I planted my soybeans last year, so I shouldn't have any GLS this year, right?
That depends again. What's your tillage practice? If there's residue, crop residue on the ground, that will still have that inoculum from when it was corn before. So no, that does not mean. If you have, it can be spread. Diseases, I should have said probably, can be spread by air too and wind. And so it doesn't have to have the crop residue for you to have an infection. So I guess with soybeans, yeah, if you've plowed the residue under, so you've got bare black soil out there, you would decrease the odds of GLS being there early, but that does not mean you can't get it because it can still be windborne.
All right, we have another question here. Do the fungicides need to stay in suspension by being constantly mixed when being injected into the irrigation water?
I think that's the best way to do it. You want to keep up agitation. You want to keep that stuff in good suspension, and why take a chance on letting it settle out? If you've got agitation available, I would definitely do that the entire application.
Okay, we have another question. I know a lot of people that spray their corn automatically when tassels emerge, even if no disease is present. Does that pay to do?
Well, again, they wouldn't be doing it all the time if it didn't pay. I think there's a certain percentage that probably do not pay, but most people that do that are looking at other things as well. They're looking at plant health issues like standability at plant. They're trying to maybe a little bit short on water, or they think it's going to get so hot that will enable that plant to go through those heat and drought areas and temperatures in the environment when it encounters them, and make it much easier for that to produce the grain that they're looking for.
Thanks, Doyle. We got one more question here. How do fungicides add yield?
Like I said at the beginning, they really don't add yield, they protect yield. By protecting, like I say, is you've got your potential when that corn seed is planted. It can't go up from there. Disease is just one thing, plant health is another, but if you treat with a fungicide, you're going to keep the plant healthier, prevent the disease possibility, and therefore you're going to keep the yield rather than add yield.
Great, thanks so much, Doyle. I think that just about wraps up our questions. Like I said, if you do have any additional questions, please feel free to text your question by texting agronomy to 313131. You can always tune in to any of our webinars. You can find those on our website. And in the meantime, I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.